let me just clarify. You all excited?
Yes.
Was that man unbelievable? Give him another round of applause. Any speakers in the room? Anybody do any speaking at all? Just stick your hands up so I can see. To stand up in front of a group of people and share from here, it's very easy to talk from here, but when you speak from the heart, that comes from a different place. And most of what he was talking about wasn't coming from his head at all, it was coming through here. So I want to honour you, that's fantastic. And I know we're going to be talking after we finish this evening. I just want to give you, none of you particularly know me, so I'll give you a quick background to myself. I have been public speaking and doing inspirational, motivational, educational talks for over 5-10 years now. Started with young groups in colleges and it's gradually moved up over the years. My background is actually half Sri Lankan and half English. So when John was talking about Sri Lanka and Colombo, my father was born in Mount Lavinia, just underneath there. So a whole history behind that. My father came here in the mid-50s because he was told that England was paved with gold. And for anyone that's come from overseas, they know their parents were sent over with that sort of aspiration. And he got a degree in mechanical engineering, came to Birmingham, and he actually met my mum because my mother left home at the age of 18 years of age. And she was trying to find a place to rent, and virtually all of the places she was looking at had signs saying no colours, no colours. So back in those days when there was a lot of discrimination, she was desperately trying to find a place where there wasn't a landlord who was discriminating against other people. And she moved into a room which was downstairs, it was a little bed set, and above was my father, all the way from Sri Lanka, with half a Norton motorbike being built underneath. He was a mechanical engineer. And she actually met him because he just had his second stroke. He had his first stroke at 29 years of age. He had another stroke at 29 years of age, and then they actually got together, they fell in love. And she tells me some unbelievable stories of walking down the streets in Birmingham and people spitting at her because she was going out with a man of colour. Back in those days, the discrimination was much more overt. And she actually moved from Birmingham with my father down to Hertfordshire, where they had 3 sons, myself and my 2 brothers. And my father had a major stroke at 36 years of age, which literally paralysed him down one side. And when they married, I think he was 32 years of age, they gave him 8 years to live. He had very, very high blood pressure. He was on all sorts of different drugs they were trying to help him out with to sort of thin his blood down. And he survived, I think it was 14 years. He'd actually passed on in his mid-40s back in 1979. And my mum was absolutely convinced the reason he stayed alive as long as he did was because of the 3 of us. He had a passion to live and to give something on, which is what you were talking about earlier on. And so I grew up as this young man, head of the family. I was 13 years of age at the time, with all my uncles saying to me, you've got to go on and achieve, you've got to be successful, look after your mum and the family, etc., etc. And so my whole dream for my whole life was one day I'm going to do this. One day I'm going to do this. One day I'm going to achieve all these things. I'm going to make family proud of me. I'm going to help my mum and do all these things. But I learned about 5-6 years ago that one day is not in a diary. And if you try looking, you won't find it. Has anybody been through the one day thing? One day I'm going to be financially free. Now I achieved it several years ago. I've just turned 40 this year. So my goal was 30 years of age. Then I put it back to 33 and I thought I'm still young. I'll put it back a couple more years. And it kept being put back, put back, put back. And I went to a UPW seminar about 5 years ago. Anybody been to UPW? Well, for those of you that have just come through, maybe 4 years ago actually, I've been reading Tony's material for years. It was a classic case of one day I'm going to go and do a seminar, one day I'm going to do this. I went and saw, who's heard of Les Brown? Fantastic. If you haven't, okay, if you've got any paper on you, write this down, live your dreams. Les Brown is one of the most inspirational speakers I've come across over the last decade. He's probably about 55 years of age now. He wrote a book called Live Your Dream, Afro-American speaker. And in there he talks about you've got to be hungry. You've got to be hungry. And he became unbelievably successful through, he was educatively retarded at school. People said to him, he put him in a retarded class, he was told you can't do this, you can't do that. And it just so happened that one day he was walking past a classroom, walked in inadvertently, thought he was in the wrong classroom, and the teacher said sit down. He said no, I'm in the wrong classroom. And the teacher said just sit down. He said no, you don't understand, I'm retarded, I'm in the wrong classroom. And he said come to the front here, remember this. He said in this room somebody's going to do something amazing. I don't know who it's going to be. It may be you, it may not be you, but just remember this one thing, Mr. Brown. He said this, he said, don't let anyone else's opinion of you influence who you become. Now, how true is that? And he held on to that. And for years afterwards, he procrastinated. And then one day he started doing talks and became very successful. Ended up on TV, had his own show, and they asked him to talk about the problems that were out there and how they could be solved, and he refused to do it. He said, I'll talk about how we can empower people, but I'm not going to talk about the negative stuff that's out there. And he ended up at Harvard University, standing in front of a group of it must have been 50 or 60 Harvard graduates, all who were very educated and had a lot of money. And some young guy stuck his hand up and said, Mr. Brown, what qualifications academically do you actually have to come here to Harvard University and talk to us and to teach us? Have you got an MBA, for example? And Les Brown, who's got no education at all, stood there and he said, MBA, now I'm not sure what you're talking about. You're talking about some sort of academic qualification? He says, yes, but it's a business degree. Have you got an MBA? And he said, young man, if you'd like to just take a seat, I can tell you this. I haven't got an MBA academically, but what I have got is a mega bank account. If you want to stay around and listen to me, feel free to do that. Otherwise, that's where the door is. And he was inspirational. And a number of speakers sort of came my way along the path. And I realized what I was doing was, and I'm going to challenge all of you tonight, I was learning this stuff, and I kind of knew how to do it. And I know this from being around Tony's stuff. I've done leadership. I was over helping out just before Christmas. I had an unbelievable experience with a lady who'd been raped. She was 63 years of age, raped in her first 4 years by a member of her family. It was an uncle. And she hadn't had a stable relationship with a man all that time because she was holding on to a belief system from when she was way, way back in her early youth. Do people do that, by the way? We do it, all of us do it in a different way. So I had this whole process of like, okay, one day. And something happened to me about 8-9 years ago, and it was a book called The Magic of Thinking Big. It's probably longer than that, maybe 10-12 years ago. Anyone heard of that? The Magic of Thinking Big by Dr. David Schwartz. Phenomenal book. And I started to realise that you've got to go and submerge yourself in these environments. Tony calls it total immersion. Well, gradually I went down this path and learning all these different things. Finally turned up at Tony Robbins' event, UPW, did the firewall, unbelievable experience. A week later, 2 weeks later, now what's the fourth day of UPW? Who comes on stage?
Nutrition.
Yeah, nutrition, and Joseph steps on stage. He talks about his mum and how she got cancer. 10 days to 2 weeks after Tony's event, my mum picks up the phone, she's talking to me on the phone, she says, son, are you on your own? And I was with a couple of friends. I said, no, can you step outside? She said, look, I haven't mentioned this to you before, but I've been for some tests. Now she knew that my whole passion all my life was to do all these things and help her create all these amazing things. And she said, the tests had just come back, I didn't tell you, but I had some problems inside. I've got cancer of the womb and cervical cancer as well, all at the same time. It completely floored me. Spent all these years wanting to get her to this wonderful place and live all these fantastic dreams, and all of a sudden I had this vision of her disappearing, and she said to me, don't worry, the doctor's going to give me chemotherapy and radiation, they're going to treat me. And I literally stopped in my tracks and I said, Mum, there's an alternative way that we can deal with this. And I said, I've just seen this amazing speaker, I've learned all this stuff. And I was living in Oxford at the time. For the next 2 days, I literally studied all these books on health. And all the stuff that I heard at UPW, all the stuff on nutrition. I was reading books by doctors who had cured themselves, not through treatment that they would give other people, but through changes in diet. So my girlfriend's Danish, she's a beautiful woman, love her to death. And she was sitting there reading these books with me. And she at the time, had grown up on meat. I mean, what are the Danish eat? Bacon and dairy products. The Danish, there's a straight line graph. If you get a chance, go and look at these books. There's a straight line graph showing the number of grams of meat eaten per day against the percentage of breast cancer victims. And it was virtually a straight line like this. The least number of victims of breast cancer were Southeast Asia. What do they eat? Fish, vegetables. Some of the highest were Western Europe. Denmark was right up there at the top. And it was literally a straight line. It just absolutely threw her. Now, we were just at the time going through the 10 days. Some of you are on it probably right now, on the 10-day cleanse, which since then I haven't touched meat or drank alcohol or had dairy products. Every now and again I'll do a zag and I'll have some things which I tease myself with. But we changed our diet massively. And I sat with my mother and I said, Mum, you've got two choices. You've got doctors here. I've got a PhD in civil engineering, so I'm a doctor, but not of medicine. So I've got my mum listening to the doctors here. I've got me, my mum's listening, and there's me saying to her, look, this is what we've learned. Look at all these books. There's all these. And I literally gave her a mini presentation. And she sat there, and I said to her, you've been my inspiration, you've been my hero all these years. Just for once, just take a moment to think about what I'm saying. Stop what's going into your body, and let's try and heal yourself naturally. And she sat there and she broke down into tears, and she said, okay, whatever you need me to do, what do you need me to do? I said, right, okay. My mum's, my stepfather now, they weren't married at the time, He had his arms crossed, and he's a Scotsman. He said, "I'm not bloody giving up meat." Can you think that?